Architectures of Spiritual Consciousness, the Integrative Architectural Mode. The Central Intuition. For the integrative architectural mind, spiritual life begins with the sense that reality is not a collection of isolated truths. A doctrine, practice, symbol, mystical experience, ethical demand, ritual gesture, psychological wound, and philosophical distinction do not stand separately. Each belongs somewhere. Each has a function, a level, a proper scale, and a relation to the whole. The deepest impulse of this mode is not merely to believe, worship, practice, analyze, or dissolve. It is to understand how the many dimensions of spiritual life fit together without being reduced to one another. This mind is disturbed by fragmentation. Something essential is lost when devotion is separated from knowledge, ritual from metaphysics, mystical experience from psychological discernment, ethics from realization, or silence from the complexity of manifestation. Its intuition is that truth may be one, but its expressions are not flat. The unity it seeks is therefore not necessarily similarity. Two paintings may differ so radically in color, form, subject, and style that one would never guess they came from the same hand. Yet the greater the freedom and genius of the painter, the less the works need to resemble one another in order to express one creative source. Difference may testify not to the absence of unity, but to the range of what unity is capable of becoming. The same possibility appears spiritually. Devotion does not need to become disguised non-duality in order to arise from the same depth as contemplative silence. Ritual does not need to speak the language of analysis. Vision does not have to become philosophy. Compassion does not have to become metaphysics. The deeper unity may be powerful enough to produce forms that remain genuinely different. This is one of the most powerful intuitions available to the architectural mind. Difference does not necessarily refute unity. The whole may become many without the many becoming mistakes. Plurality may be the expressive freedom of the source rather than a defect awaiting correction. Reality unfolds through levels, powers, faculties, languages, symbols, bodies, practices, and worlds. The task is not to erase these differences too quickly, but to see how they arise, how they operate, where they conflict, and how they may be returned to a deeper unity without losing their specific dignity. This is why the integrative architectural mind is not satisfied with shallow syncretism. It does not want a spiritual cocktail assembled from attractive fragments. It wants relation, not mixture, structure, not accumulation. It wants to know what each element means within its own world before asking whether it can be placed in a larger one. A mantra is not merely a sound. A ritual is not merely an external action. A doctrine is not merely an opinion. A vision is not automatically revelation. A psychological interpretation is not automatically reduction. A contemplative silence is not automatically the whole truth. Each must be examined according to its own operation. Only then can it be integrated honestly. The central pleasure of this mode is the moment when scattered or conflicting elements reveal their place. What seemed opposed appears as differentiated expressions of a larger pattern. A rejected faculty regains dignity. A once absolute truth becomes proportionate. A contradiction becomes intelligible without being prematurely erased. Its characteristic joy can be stated in two words: it fits. A scripture that seemed dead becomes alive when its symbolic, psychological, historical, and contemplative dimensions suddenly illuminate one another. Myths separated by continents reveal a recurrent structure. A practice that appeared irrational acquires meaning once its ritual and metaphysical world is restored. Several traditions that seemed merely contradictory disclose different operations of consciousness. This is not merely accumulation of knowledge. A scholar may know 50 traditions. The architect experiences multiplicity as a demand for relation. The distinctive gift is relational sight, the ability to see a shape made by things that, taken separately, looked disconnected. The experience can be almost revelatory. One does not merely acquire another fact, the field reorganizes. What looked like fragments becomes landscape. This can produce real liberation. The mind is no longer trapped inside one spiritual language, nor forced into cynical distance from all of them. It can honor devotion without emotional captivity, practice self-inquiry without allowing it to destroy every relative distinction, respect ritual without mechanical formalism, and acknowledge visionary experience without treating every image as unquestionable authority. The integrative architectural mind seeks a world with room, But its highest form does not build a system in order to possess reality. It builds so that the parts may be seen clearly, related rightly, and finally return to what exceeds the structure itself. The architecture is not the absolute. At its best, it is an offering to the absolute. Its movement is threefold: differentiation, integration, and return. It differentiates so that living truths are not confused. It integrates so that they do not remain fragmented. It returns the completed structure to the source so that the map does not become a throne. Without this final movement, the integrative mind becomes a builder of magnificent conceptual palaces. With it, architecture becomes a contemplative act. The central intuition can therefore be stated simply: spiritual truth manifests through many differentiated forms, and wisdom requires seeing their relations without allowing any one form or the map that contains them to claim the whole. The world from within. From within the integrative architectural mind, reality is experienced as layered. A statement is rarely only a statement. A ritual is rarely only a ritual. A doctrine is rarely only a doctrine. A human reaction is rarely only a reaction. Each appears within a wider configuration: psychological, symbolic, metaphysical, ethical, historical, and practical at once. This mind instinctively asks not only whether something is true, but where it belongs. Is this a psychological fact, a metaphysical claim, a symbolic expression, a devotional language, a ritual necessity, a social convention, or a direct spiritual insight? Is it valid on one level but dangerous when universalized? Is it medicine for one temperament but poison for another? Is it a partial truth pretending to be the whole? The architectural mind is therefore sensitive to misplaced truths. It may accept a teaching and still resist the way it is used. It may recognize the beauty of devotion while questioning dependency, honor radical self inquiry while rejecting the premature dismissal of ordinary life, respect tradition while asking whether inherited authority has become mechanical, value psychology while refusing to reduce the sacred to psychology. Its basic movement is not simple agreement or rejection, it is placement. A powerful mantra raises questions about the world in which mantra has meaning. A mystical experience raises questions about interpretation, transmission, and transformation. A teacher's presence raises questions about authority, projection, lineage, and ethical fruit. A doctrine of non duality raises questions about embodiment, suffering, devotion, and conduct. The mind keeps asking, what is the place of this? And then, what happens if this becomes absolute? This second question is crucial. The integrative architectural mind can often admire a path more deeply once it no longer needs to make it total. It sees how a mode can disclose something real and still distort reality when it becomes sovereign. Devotion may open the heart, but if it becomes the only language, discernment may be treated as betrayal. Analysis may purify thought, but if it becomes the only authority, life can be cut into sterile fragments. Transgression may expose false purity, but if it becomes identity, it may sanctify appetite. Contemplative subtraction may reveal the source, but if applied too early or too broadly, it may erase unresolved human material. The architectural mind is drawn toward comparison because comparison reveals structure. At its best, comparison does not flatten traditions into sameness. It shows why two paths using similar words may perform different operations, and why two paths using different words may address similar human structures. It is something like looking at a great mountain. One tradition knows the northern route, severe and icy, where the climber strips away every unnecessary burden. Another knows a relational route where companionship, song, and trust carry the pilgrim upward. Another preserves ancient steps cut into the rock, where movement follows precise forms. Another enters forbidden terrain, where what is rejected must be faced directly. Another studies the whole mountain, its ridges, weather, altitudes, and hidden connections. The architectural mind does not say that all routes are the same. They are not. Some are steeper, safer, more beautiful, or more dangerous. Some require solitude, others lineage. Some are unsuitable for particular climbers. Some reach a summit-like experience but do not integrate the descent. Some do not go where they claim to go, but it also refuses to believe that one visible path exhausts the mountain. Nor does it assume that every successful route must finally look the same from within. A climber may encounter the summit through silence, love, service, sacramental presence, visionary luminosity, or a mode for which the architect has no adequate category. Common depth does not require identical phenomenology. Its task is to understand the root without despising the mountain, and the mountain without erasing the root. Such a mind may hear one teacher speak of surrender, another of emptiness, another of recognition, grace, or purification, and ask, what faculty of the human being is being activated here? This is why the integrative mind often lives between reverence and criticism. It cannot simply surrender to a form once it has seen the form's limits, but it also cannot dismiss the form once it has tasted its power. It is too reverent to become a simple skeptic and too discerning to remain a simple believer. This produces a particular tension. The architectural person may feel gratitude and distance toward the same tradition. A teacher may have changed their life while remaining narrow in important ways. A doctrine may nourish them without being allowed to interpret every event. They may love a path and still step outside the world it creates. The recurring thought patterns of this mode sound like this. This is true, but not in the way its followers usually claim. This teaching is powerful, but for what kind of person, at what stage, and under what conditions? What does this practice reveal, and what does it leave untouched? What is being confused here? Experience, interpretation, doctrine, authority, or fruit? How can these truths be related without being mixed? Where does this belong within the whole? At its best, this mode allows a person to move through spiritual worlds without submitting blindly or dismissing arrogantly, but it also means that the architectural mind rarely feels completely at home. Every world that shelters it eventually reveals its walls. Every complete answer exposes what it excludes. Every powerful method begins to show the type of person it cannot help. This can create loneliness. The person may be accused of pride by devotees, coldness by mystics, lack of faith by traditionalists, excessive system building by contemplatives, and insufficient simplicity by those who prefer direct practice. Some criticism may be justified, even when it is not. It touches a real difficulty. The architectural mind sees relations that many practitioners do not want examined. There is another reason why the architectural mind often remains lonely. It may be experienced as threatening. Religious communities commonly welcome architecture within their own walls. They need theologians, commentators, ritual specialists, and teachers who can arrange their doctrines, practices, authorities, and stages into a coherent world. What they tolerate less easily is the mind that compares this world with others and begins to place the architecture itself. Such a mind may recognize that another tradition has preserved a truth. One's own tradition excludes that an allegedly universal doctrine performs only one spiritual operation, or that experiences claimed as unique appear elsewhere under different interpretations. It may also see how declarations of finality protect not only faith, but institutional identity, authority, succession, and material survival. The architectural mind therefore threatens the monopoly of a closed sacred world. It does not necessarily deny that world's truth, but it denies its right to define the scale of every other truth. What the institution presents as the whole may be returned to proportion. This is why the integrator may be dismissed as arrogant, impure, faithless, rootless, or excessively intellectual. Some criticism may be justified. Architectural intelligence carries a real temptation to stand above practitioners and reduce their living commitments to categories. But ridicule may also serve as boundary defense. The religious world attacks the one who can see beyond its walls, because such sight weakens the necessity of remaining enclosed within them. The mature integrator does not use this freedom to destroy another person's faith unnecessarily. They know that a limited spiritual world may still provide genuine nourishment, discipline, meaning, and transformation. But they also cannot pretend that one architecture exhausts the sacred merely because an institution depends upon that claim. Its authority is therefore not located simply in scripture, institution, teacher, experience, logic, or feeling. It seeks authority in ordered relation. A scripture is authoritative, but must be interpreted. A teacher is authoritative, but must be tested by fruit. An experience is authoritative, but must be distinguished from its interpretation. A practice is authoritative in relation to its aim and result. A doctrine is authoritative, but not when it destroys truths it cannot contain. The mature architectural mind does not use complexity to escape commitment. It uses complexity to make commitment more truthful. It knows every act of seeing is situated, but refuses to confuse situatedness with imprisonment. One may stand within a tradition, love one path, and practice one method, while recognizing that other doors open onto real regions of the sacred. In this mode, spiritual seriousness means proportion. The immature mind asks, which path is final? The cynical mind asks, are all paths merely human constructions? The shallow syncretist says, all paths are the same. The architectural mind asks, What does each path reveal, by what operation, for what kind of soul, at what cost, and within what limits? Its danger is that everything becomes material for thought. Its dignity is that nothing real needs to be excluded merely because it does not fit the first language in which truth appeared. For this mode, wisdom is not the destruction of plurality. Wisdom is the right placing of plurality in relation to the whole. What the integrative architectural mode is not. The integrative architectural mode can resemble several other forms of spiritual intelligence. It may employ analysis, compare traditions, preserve ritual classifications, interpret visions, or incorporate transgressive practices. Yet none of these activities by itself makes a mind architectural. Its defining movement is relation. It distinguishes different truths, asks what operation each performs, and seeks a wider structure in which they can coexist without being flattened or allowed to become absolute. It is not the analytical dialectical mind. The closest resemblance is the analytical dialectical mode. Both value distinction, precision, coherence, and the exposure of contradiction, but they ask different questions. The analytical mind asks, is this claim true? How is it known? Are its terms clear? Does the conclusion follow? Can the objection be answered? Its movement is toward determination, valid or invalid, coherent or incoherent, justified or unjustified. The architectural mind asks, where does this claim belong? What operation does it perform? At what level is it valid? What does it illuminate? And what does it leave untouched? How can it be related to truths that appear to contradict it? Analysis clarifies the parts. Architecture establishes proportion among them. An analyst may dismantle an incoherent system without needing to construct a larger one. The architect may recognize a real contradiction and still ask whether the opposing teachings address different dimensions, capacities, or stages of spiritual life. Without analytical discipline, architecture becomes vague synthesis. Without architectural intelligence, analysis may become exact within one domain, while remaining unable to understand why several incompatible systems continue to produce genuine transformation. It is not erudition or comparative scholarship. The architectural mind is not simply broad learning. A scholar may know many scriptures, languages, historical layers, and doctrinal disputes. Such knowledge may be indispensable, but accumulation does not yet create architecture. Erudition gathers. Architecture selects, weighs, relates, and organizes. Comparison also remains insufficient by itself. A person may catalog similarities among traditions without understanding what their teachings actually do. Another may force superficial equivalences and call the result unity. The architectural mode begins when plurality becomes a problem of proportion. It asks how differences can remain real while belonging to an intelligible whole. This is why the professor who understands initiation from outside is not yet an initiate, and why knowledge of several sacred worlds is not the same as having been transformed by them. It is not the ritual or visionary mode. Ritual and visionary traditions often generate elaborate architectures, but their primary operations remain different. The ritual sacramental mind asks, what form must be enacted? What sequence makes the sacred present? What has been transmitted? What conditions make the rite valid? It inhabits sacred order through performance. The visionary receptive mind asks, what is showing itself? What presence or power has entered the field? What is being communicated? It receives material that exceeds deliberate construction. The architect asks what place ritual or vision occupies within the larger field. How does it relate to doctrine, psychology, ethics, initiation, embodiment, and liberation? What does it reveal, and what authority should it possess? Ritual enacts, vision receives, architecture places. A person may therefore be a profound ritualist or visionary without being primarily architectural. Conversely, an architect may understand ritual and vision while lacking the discipline, receptivity, or existential exposure through which they become living realities. It is not the subtractive axial mind. The subtractive axial mode moves in almost the opposite direction. Architecture differentiates and relates. Subtraction returns phenomena toward their source and questions the apparent center around which the whole structure has been built. Faced with spiritual complexity, the architect asks how its elements belong together. The subtractive practitioner asks who requires them to belong together, or whether an independent claimant can be found at all. Architecture constructs relation among worlds. Subtraction questions the one who possesses the worlds. These modes correct each other profoundly. Subtraction prevents the architect from confusing the map with reality. Architecture prevents subtraction from dismissing psychological, ethical, historical, and ritual distinctions before their work has been completed. It is not the transgressive, transformative mind. The architectural mode is often attracted to transgressive traditions because they force excluded dimensions back into the sacred whole. But transgression is not architecture. The transgressive mind crosses, reverses, or transforms a boundary. It confronts impurity, desire, terror, shame, embodiment, death, marginality, and forbidden power. The architectural mind asks, why does this boundary exist? For whom may it be crossed? What operation does the crossing perform? What qualification and discipline must contain it? How does it relate to ethics, ritual, devotion, and realization? The transgressive mode crosses the boundary. The architectural mode places both the boundary and its crossing within a larger field. When architecture merely admires transgression, it may romanticize what it has never undergone. When transgression rejects architecture, it may treat every limit as repression and every consequence as evidence of insufficient understanding. Understanding is not participation. The architectural mind may understand the language of nearly every other mode without undergoing its transformation. It can classify devotion without being broken open by love. It can interpret ritual without submitting to sacred form. It can place compassion without serving anyone. It can explain vision without being seized by it. It can discuss silence without being stripped by silence. This is its peculiar danger. Other modes disclose, enact, receive, test, or transform particular dimensions of spiritual life. Architecture relates those dimensions, but cannot generate their living substance merely by understanding them. The mature architect, therefore, does not simply assign the other modes their places. Those modes have acted upon the architect. Devotion has softened them, discipline constrained them, vision interrupted them, suffering tested them, compassion returned them to ethical immediacy, and silence loosened their possession of the map. The immature architect includes other modes within the system. The mature architect allows other modes to transform the one constructing it. The distinctive movement. The integrative architectural mode may borrow precision from analysis, material from vision, form from ritual, depth from contemplation, warmth from devotion, sobriety from ethics, and transformative force from confrontation with boundaries. Its unique work is to bring these powers into relation without collapsing them into one another or allowing any one of them to declare itself sovereign. It is therefore not defined by having many interests or knowing many traditions. It is defined by the need to ask, what does each mode reveal? What operation does it perform? Where does it exceed its competence? And what larger proportion allows it to remain true without becoming absolute? The central operation and mature fruit. The central operation of the integrative architectural mind is to differentiate and relate. It does not begin by dissolving plurality. It takes plurality seriously. Different experiences, practices, doctrines, traditions, and psychological movements are first distinguished. Each is asked what it does, what faculty it activates, what transformation it promises, what danger it carries, and what kind of person it forms. Only after distinction can real integration begin. This separates architectural consciousness from shallow eclecticism. The eclectic mind gathers fragments because they attract it. The architectural mind asks what each fragment means within its original world, what operation it performs there, and whether it can be related to other truths without being falsified. Its movement can be described in 4 stages: distinction, relation, integration, and return. First, the mind distinguishes. It asks, what exactly is this? Is this devotion, metaphysics, psychology, ritual technology, ethical instruction, contemplative method, social control, poetic exaggeration, or genuine realization? Is this a direct insight or a later interpretation? Is this medicine or universal doctrine? Necessary structure or inherited habit? Humility or dependency? Freedom or spiritualized avoidance? This operation is protective. It prevents the person from being swallowed too quickly by a total world. A tradition says, this is grace. The architectural mind asks what experience is being named, what interpretation is being added, and what obligations follow. A teacher says, "This is the highest path." It asks, highest in what sense, for whom, under what conditions, and with what visible fruit? A doctrine says, "All is one." It asks whether this unity clarifies difference or erases it. Second, the mind relates. It asks, how does this stand in relation to other truths? A contemplative insight into silence may be real, but how does it relate to devotion, ethics, trauma, beauty, ritual, sexuality, grief, social responsibility, and work? Devotional surrender may transform, but how does it relate to discernment, boundaries, projection, and maturity? A transgressive practice may reveal the constructed nature of purity, but how does it relate to consent, discipline, humility, and accountability? Relation protects the mind from one sidedness. No mode is allowed to become the whole merely because it disclosed something powerful. A real truth can become false when placed at the wrong scale. Third, the mind integrates. It asks, what larger pattern allows these truths to coexist without being flattened? Integration does not make all contradictions disappear, it clarifies their nature. Some conflicts are genuine, others are conflicts of language, temperament, stage, method, or scale. Some lie between a teacher's realization and personality, or between what a tradition reveals and what its institution protects. This can bring deep relief. A person no longer has to choose between blind loyalty and total rejection. They can say, this was real, this was distorted. This path healed one faculty and wounded another. This teacher transmitted something powerful and also had limits. This doctrine liberates as medicine but becomes destructive when turned into metaphysical totalitarianism. This practice opened a door, but it was not the whole house. Integration can restore dignity to abandoned parts of the soul. A person once ruled by radical silence may recover devotion. Someone wounded by emotional religion may recover analysis. Someone damaged by rigid ritual may rediscover sacred form. Someone intoxicated by visions may regain ethical sobriety. Someone trapped in concepts may finally be pierced by practice. This is one of the mature gifts of the mode. It can return exiled truths without reinstalling them as dictators. Fourth, the architecture must be returned. It asks, what remains beyond the map? This is the easiest movement to forget. The mind can build a system so complete and luminous that the system begins to feel like realization. The person may confuse understanding the relations between modes with being transformed by them, or mistake the beauty of the map for the summit. Return prevents this. The completed structure must be offered back to life, silence, God, the absolute, and the ordinary human situation. The architecture must not become a throne for the one who understands. A good map helps the climber move. A bad map becomes an object of worship. No map breathes, suffers, loves, acts, forgives, or dies. Life tests what architecture only arranges. The mature fruit of this mode is therefore proportion, the capacity to know the proper weight, scope, level, and limit of a truth. Proportion allows devotion without dependency, self-inquiry without contempt for human life, ritual without formalism, compassion without saviorhood, analysis without killing reverence, transgression without ethical exemption, and vision without turning every image into authority. A mature architectural person is not someone who knows a little about everything and therefore stands above everyone. That is the counterfeit. The mature form can recognize the dignity of many spiritual languages while remaining committed, embodied, humble, and morally awake. Such a person can endure real difference. They can respect a path without entering it, leave a world without falsifying everything it revealed, and belong somewhere without demanding that this somewhere explain everything. The mature fruit is also freedom from spiritual captivity. One is no longer imprisoned inside the first powerful language that opened reality, nor condemned to wander among fragments. Multiple truths can live in ordered relation. At this stage, another distinction becomes decisive. The refinement of the map and the depth to which consciousness has traveled are not the same variable. A metaphysical system may be vastly more sophisticated than another. It may make finer distinctions, integrate more phenomena, resolve more apparent contradictions, and possess a more precise language of realization. None of this by itself proves that the person inhabiting it has realized more deeply than someone whose doctrine is conceptually simpler. A devotee may possess a comparatively simple metaphysics, and yet be emptied by love to a degree the philosopher has never approached. A non-dualist may speak with flawless precision while remaining psychologically defended. A ritualist may lack a universal theory and nevertheless embody sacred presence with extraordinary depth. Architecture therefore learns not to confuse second-order explanation with spiritual altitude. The ability to classify another consciousness does not establish superiority to it. This changes how the modes themselves are understood. A mode does not necessarily become mature by converting into another mode or by adopting the metaphysics of the mode that claims the highest summit. It may mature by passing through its own shadow until its defining operation becomes transparent, non-possessive, proportionate, and capable of correction. But this freedom is genuine only when it changes life. The person becomes less reactive when a beloved tradition is criticized, less desperate to crown a final authority, less ashamed of former devotion, and less tempted by total explanations. They become more capable of gratitude, boundaries, uncertainty, and the sentence, "This is true, but not total." At its highest, the mode does not produce the possessor of a system. It produces a person in whom many truths have found their right place, and because they have found their place, they no longer need to fight for the throne. Distortion and self-sealing. The distortion of the integrative architectural mind begins when the map stops serving reality and begins replacing it. At first, architecture is an instrument of clarity. It distinguishes levels, compares traditions, locates practices, and rescues the mind from captivity inside one language. But gradually, the structure can become more important than what it was built to reveal. The person no longer asks, "What is this?" They ask, "Where does this fit in my system?" Reality is no longer allowed to arrive with its own weight. Every experience, person, objection, tradition, wound, and event is immediately translated into the language of the architecture. The map begins to eat the world. The first danger is that inclusion becomes annexation. The architectural mind rarely rejects things crudely. It gives everything a place: devotion, ritual, silence, compassion, transgression, criticism, other traditions. But this generosity can become hidden domination. Everything is included only after being subordinated to the integrating system. The other path is not allowed to challenge the architecture from outside. It is translated into a level, mode, partial truth, stage, function, or configuration. Nothing is simply heard. Everything is positioned. The distorted architectural mind says, "Yes, you are right, but only within the limited region I have assigned to you." This is not hospitality, it is imperialism in the language of synthesis. The deepest imperialism of architecture is therefore not always exclusion. Crude systems exclude. Sophisticated systems can do something far more powerful. They comprehend, translate, honor, and finally subordinate. The rival is not expelled from the city. It is given a beautiful district whose borders were drawn by the architect. The system may even permit many roads: devotion, asceticism, ritual, direct grace, contemplative recognition, scholarship, transgression, spontaneous awakening. Everything may be granted legitimacy. Yet the crucial question remains: has the architecture left many roads open while deciding in advance where every successful road must finally arrive? If every authentic realization must ultimately confirm the architect's description of the summit, plurality survives at the level of root but disappears at the level of final meaning. This is how a system can become enormously inclusive and still remain closed. It understands opposition so well that opposition loses the ability to stand outside the architecture and answer back. Being able to place an objection is not the same as being able to be changed by it. The second danger is that coherence substitutes for truth. The architectural mind loves the moment when a doctrine, symbol, psychological mechanism, historical pattern, and personal experience illuminate one another. There is beauty in this, and sometimes real insight, but the pleasure of coherence is not proof. A system may be elegant and still be false in parts. An analogy may be luminous and imprecise. A pattern may explain much and still fail before one stubborn fact. A synthesis may feel true because it heals fragmentation, not because every relation within it has been tested. The mind says, everything fits. The harder question is, what would I allow not to fit? If nothing is allowed not to fit, the architecture has become closed. A related error is the conversion of conceptual sophistication into a hierarchy of realization. The architect sees that one doctrine is more internally differentiated, more philosophically powerful, or more capable of integrating rival perspectives, and then quietly assumes that this conceptual superiority establishes spiritual superiority. It may not. A more accurate map can matter enormously. It can prevent confusion, expose inflation, and protect realization from naive interpretation. But no increase in conceptual precision automatically measures surrender, compassion, contemplative depth, devotion, ethical transformation, or freedom from self-deception. The map can be more sophisticated while the traveler is less transformed. The third danger is that the map maker moves toward the center. At first, the person builds in order to understand. Later, they begin to need the role of the one who understands, mediator of traditions, judge of partial views, interpreter of conflicts, the one who sees what devotees, ascetics, scholars, activists, and ritualists cannot see from within their own worlds. This may be hidden beneath humility. The person listens, but from above. They are kind, but not vulnerable. They understand everyone, but are rarely interrupted by anyone. They do not enter dialogue in order to be changed. They enter in order to place the other correctly. This is the throne. The fourth danger is ethical dilution. Because the architectural mind sees many levels, it can become evasive before simple moral reality. A cruel act becomes shadow dynamics, a betrayal becomes karmic unfolding, abuse becomes distorted guru function, an invasion becomes civilizational conflict, a lie becomes mythic necessity, a person's suffering becomes material for transformation. These interpretations may contain partial truth. Events do have psychological, historical, symbolic, and spiritual dimensions. But complex explanation must not weaken moral perception. The architectural mind must still be able to say, this is wrong. Not everything needs immediate elevation into a larger pattern. Sometimes the first duty is to see who harmed whom, who had power, who lied, who crossed a boundary, and who paid the price. If the architecture cannot preserve ordinary ethical sobriety, it has become dangerous. It may explain suffering while failing to protect the person being swallowed by explanation. The fifth danger is sterile magnificence. The architecture becomes larger while life remains unchanged. The person can explain devotion without becoming more loving, compassion without becoming more available, ritual without creating sacred rhythm, self-inquiry without becoming freer, transgression without risking transformation, and humility while growing secretly superior. The system may be brilliant while the human being remains untouched. Ordinary life gives the verdict. How does the person speak to a child? Handle criticism, apologize, rest? Can they stop interpreting and be present? Love someone who does not fit their categories? Complete the necessary task when no metaphysical meaning is available? If not, the architecture is ornamented avoidance. The sixth danger is endless construction. Because the whole is never complete, the architectural mind may postpone life indefinitely. One more tradition must be studied, one more distinction clarified, one more text translated, one more contradiction resolved. The person imagines that once the structure is complete, then they will live, love, choose, rest, belong, and act. But the structure is never complete. The mind can spend decades preparing to inhabit reality while actually living inside preparation. The seventh danger is self-sealing. Once architecture becomes identity, it begins protecting itself from correction. If someone disagrees, the system explains why. If a tradition resists being placed, the system says the tradition has not understood its own deeper function. If ordinary life contradicts the architecture, ordinary life is assigned to a lower level. If the person becomes isolated, isolation is interpreted as the price of seeing more deeply. If the system produces no visible transformation, the transformation is declared subtle or misunderstood. If the architecture causes harm, the recipient is said to have been unprepared. In this way, nothing can challenge the structure. The mind says, even your resistance has a place in my map. That sentence is a sign of danger. A living architecture must remain vulnerable to reality. It must be able to break. It must allow a fact, person, failure, wound, or moral demand to stand before it and say, your map does not contain me. The counterfeit personality of this mode is the sovereign interpreter. The sovereign interpreter appears spacious, intelligent, subtle, and inclusive. They may speak reverently about many traditions and criticize dogmatism, but secretly all roads pass through them. They do not bow. They include bowing as a category. They do not repent. They explain repentance. They do not meet the other. They interpret the other. This is the fall of the mode. The gift was relation. The distortion is possession through relation. The gift was proportion. The distortion is the claim to assign all proportions. The gift was integration. The distortion is the absorption of everything into the integrator. The architectural mind becomes mature only when it understands that its own mode is also only a mode. It too reveals and conceals. It too must be corrected by devotion, pierced by silence, tested by action, softened by compassion, disciplined by ethics, interrupted by vision, and embodied through life. The clearest sign that the map has become a throne is this: the person can explain every mode of transformation, but no longer allows themselves to be transformed. Testing it in life. The integrative architectural mind is tested most severely where thought can no longer protect itself by becoming more subtle. Other modes often have visible disciplines. The ritualist performs the rite, the ascetic refuses the appetite, the devotee loves, serves, sings, prays, and remembers. The analyst argues and defends distinctions. The compassionate person responds to suffering. The transgressive practitioner crosses a boundary in embodied reality and bears the consequences. The architectural mind can understand all these modes while remaining untouched by them. It can describe devotion without becoming tender, ritual without consecrating time, compassion without helping anyone, transgression without risking identity, silence without being stripped by silence, and embodiment while remaining enclosed in concepts. That is why this mode requires concrete tests. The first is simple: can the person help? A person may speak beautifully about non duality, compassion, and unity, but when someone stands before them tired, ill, grieving, poor, frightened, abandoned, or overwhelmed, can the architecture descend into an act? Can it become money sent, food bought, a child comforted, a boundary defended, a practical call made, a task completed, or a person accompanied through difficulty? Or does the suffering person become material for interpretation? The architectural mind may see karmic patterns, projections, archetypes, family systems, and developmental stages. Some of that may be true. The test is whether this seeing makes the person more available or less. The mature architecture asks, what is actually needed here? When someone is drowning, the first act is not to explain the symbolism of water. The second test is whether the person can act without perfect clarity. The architectural mind wants to understand the whole configuration before moving: causes, meanings, risks, levels, and consequences. This may produce wisdom. It may also produce paralysis. Life often requires action before the map is complete. A child needs protection now. A boundary must be set now. A harmful situation must be named now. A friend needs help now. A decision must be made with incomplete knowledge. A body needs rest before the theory of exhaustion is finished. The mature mind can say, I do not understand everything, but I understand enough to act. Otherwise, intelligence becomes an alibi for postponement. The third test is ethical sobriety. Can the person preserve simple moral perception while seeing many levels? A mature integrator can recognize trauma, history, symbolism, conditioning, collective forces, and spiritual lessons without dissolving responsibility. They can still say, this was wrong. This person was harmed. This explanation does not justify the action. The victim must not be sacrificed to the elegance of the interpretation. If the system cannot distinguish understanding a cause from excusing an act, it has failed. The fourth test is whether the person can be interrupted. Architecture loves continuity, relation, and completion. Life arrives as interruption. A child breaks the rhythm, illness ruins the plan, war enters the calendar, family chaos destroys the clean schedule, the body refuses to serve the project, another person's pain does not fit the chapter being written. Can the person stop building? Can they leave the architecture unfinished and enter the situation before them? This does not mean surrendering to every demand. Boundaries remain necessary, but if the structure always receives priority over the living person, it has become an idol. The fifth test is whether the person can love someone they cannot place. The architectural mind often experiences love through understanding. It wants to see the other person's wounds, patterns, modes, history, symbolic function, and place in the larger drama. This can make love perceptive. It can also make love invasive. A real person is not only a configuration. They may be illuminated by categories such as devotion, trauma, narcissism, shadow, masculinity, femininity, bhakti, or tantra, but they are never exhausted by them. The mature mind can think deeply about another person and still say, my understanding of you is not you. Without this, the integrator controls not by force, but by interpretation. The other becomes a known object inside an inner system. Love becomes impossible because love requires that the other remain partly free from one's knowledge. The sixth test is whether the person can undergo a real loss of identity. The architectural mind can explain ego death, surrender, initiation, humiliation, repentance, failure, and rebirth. But can it endure an event or act that breaks the image through which it knows itself? Real transgression is not theatrical extremity. It is a crossing that exposes an identity one has secretly protected. For one person, it may be apologizing without explanation. For another, refusing a role performed for years. For another, telling the truth where they usually preserve a noble image. For another, accepting ordinary responsibility instead of remaining the tragic spiritual outsider. For another, asking for help, abandoning the fantasy of a great mission, or choosing a simple human life over exceptional destiny. The point is not extremity, the point is cost. A real test makes the person pay in the currency of identity, not concepts. The mature architectural mind asks, what truth am I willing to embody even if it destroys the image of the one who understands? The seventh test is whether the person can be corrected by other modes. The architectural mind must be softened by devotion, pierced by subtraction, disciplined by restraint, embodied by ritual or repeated practice, tested by compassion, challenged by analysis, interrupted by vision, and humbled by ethical reality. A mature integrator does not merely include these modes as categories. They allow them to act upon the integrator. It is one thing to say, devotion has its place. It is another to bow, thank, grieve, love, or ask forgiveness. It is one thing to say, compassion is indispensable. It is another to answer the phone, spend money, lose time, or carry inconvenience. It is one thing to say, transgression can break false identity. It is another to perform the act that exposes one's own fear, vanity, dependency, or pride. It is one thing to say, silence exceeds the map. It is another to let the whole map fall silent. The eighth test is whether the architecture can admit a reality greater than its explanation. Can the person encounter someone whose conceptual framework appears less sophisticated and still allow the possibility that this person has realized something more deeply? Can a devotee reveal a degree of self-forgetting love that the architect cannot translate without remainder? Can a ritualist embody something the comparative scholar can describe but has never entered? Can a contemplative disclose a depth for which the architecture possesses no adequate category? The test is severe because architecture naturally experiences explanatory range as altitude, but to explain a mode is not to stand above it. The mature architect can say, my framework helps me understand what is happening here, and yet what is happening may exceed the framework. Another consciousness may know through participation what I know only through placement. This requires a rare humility. There may be something here that my map cannot contain without diminishing it. The ninth test is ordinary life. This may be the harshest because it offers little grandeur. Can the person work honestly, care for the body, maintain a room, friendship, schedule, child, and promise, speak kindly when tired, earn money without despising the mundane, belong to a limited place without constantly escaping into the universal, live one life instead of arranging all possible lives? The architectural mind is attracted to totality. Ordinary life is particular, it forces incarnation. There is no abstract whole when a child needs breakfast, taxes must be paid, illness requires patience, work must be finished, the house is tense, or the body is exhausted. The question becomes mercilessly simple. Can the one who understands the structure of spiritual consciousness also wash the dishes, keep the promise, protect the child, complete the work, and rest? If not, the architecture is still floating above life. The mature fruit of testing is incarnation. The map comes down into speech, conduct, limits, service, love, decision, apology, refusal, and endurance. The architecture stops being merely luminous. It becomes responsible. Then the person no longer needs to prove that they see the whole. Their understanding is visible in how they inhabit the part given to them. The mature architectural mind is tested whenever reality says, do not explain me yet, meet me first. If it can meet before interpreting, act before completing the system, help before theorizing, love before placing, repent before explaining, and rest before building again, then its architecture has begun to become real. Traditions, exemplars, and configurations. The integrative architectural mode is relatively rare as the dominant form of spiritual life. This rarity should not be confused with rank. Rarity is not supremacy. Human consciousness does not seem to distribute its capacities in equal proportions, any more than nature distributes every element in equal abundance. Devotional consciousness is common because relation, longing, gratitude, dependence, and love belong to ordinary human life. Compassion is continually called forth by suffering. Ritual stabilizes communities. Analysis appears wherever claims conflict. Civilization scale architectural consciousness seems to require a rarer conjunction: breadth, tolerance for complexity, appetite for systems, the ability to inhabit several symbolic worlds at once, and the constructive force to make multiplicity form a coherent whole. The modes may therefore be understood partly as an ecology. Equal dignity does not require equal distribution. A living world may need many practitioners of certain operations and comparatively few people whose central task is to rearrange the relations among entire worlds. Yet rarity does not mean small consequence. Architectural minds have unusually high structural leverage. One great system builder can create a conceptual world later inhabited by thousands or millions. The gift and the danger therefore scale together. A private devotional distortion may wound a circle of relationships. A distorted civilization scale architecture can reorganize how whole populations interpret religion, history, morality, or political reality. Every serious tradition contains architecture. Doctrine, practice, authority, ritual, ethics, anthropology, cosmology, and liberation must eventually be ordered. But architecture usually serves another primary mode. In devotional traditions, it serves love. In ritual traditions, sacred form. In ascetic traditions, purification. In contemplative traditions, silence, emptiness, or recognition. In compassionate traditions, liberation from suffering. The mode becomes dominant when relating the whole field becomes spiritually central in itself. The goal is not only to worship, purify, serve, receive, analyze, or dissolve, but to understand how these movements belong within one differentiated whole. Historically, this mode appears most strongly in great synthesizers, commentators, system builders, encyclopedic teachers, and comparative minds. It also appears in universities, among scholars who can understand several traditions with impressive subtlety, while remaining personally outside them. This academic form deserves respect. It can preserve historical difference, compare sources carefully, expose simplistic claims, and prevent one tradition from swallowing all others, but it also exposes the mode's weakness. A professor may understand initiation without being initiated, devotion without being broken open by love, ritual without kneeling, fasting, or entering sacred time, non-duality without undergoing the discipline by which identification loosens. Such a person may know the mountain through maps, travel journals, and geological diagrams. This is not nothing, but it is not climbing. The problem begins when the observational position becomes secretly superior to practice. The scholar becomes the sovereign observer, able to see the structures and contradictions of traditions without risking the vulnerability of commitment. The result may be intellectual freedom. It may also be spiritual homelessness, disguised as sophistication. For this reason, the strongest exemplars are not merely scholars of traditions, but figures in whom architecture was joined to discipline, transmission, and existential commitment. They built from within a world they had inhabited deeply. Perennialism and the architecture of tradition. Modern perennialism and traditionalism offer one of the clearest intellectual expressions of the integrative architectural mode. Thinkers such as René Guénon and Fritjof Schuon understood the religions as distinct formal revelations of one transcendent metaphysical truth. They rejected both sectarian exclusivism and the shallow claim that all traditions are simply identical. Each religion possessed its own symbolic language, ritual form, spiritual economy, and legitimate path, while sharing an esoteric center beyond external difference. This gave the current real power. It allowed several traditions to be honored without dissolving them into mixture and restored dignity to sacred forms that modernity had dismissed as obsolete. It also exposed the limits of evaluating religion only through history, sociology, psychology, or personal sentiment. Yet perennialism reveals the architectural shadow with unusual clarity. Once the perennial structure is accepted, every tradition can be interpreted according to a map established in advance. Differences that resist the system may be treated as merely exoteric, degenerate, incomplete, or misunderstood by the tradition's own followers. The architecture becomes difficult to challenge because it claims access to the transcendent principle from which all religious forms can be placed. The perennialist therefore risks becoming the sovereign interpreter, the one who belongs fully to no single world, yet claims to know the inner meaning of them all. What begins as reverence for plurality can become possession through metaphysical classification. Perennialism shows both the greatness and danger of the modern architectural mind. It can preserve the dignity of many traditions, but it can also imprison them within a theory of what they must ultimately be. Kaula and the architecture of totality. One of the clearest traditional homes of the integrative architectural mode is Kaula Tantra. This architectural tendency is not confined to one Kaula scripture or lineage. Across the different Kaula transmissions, the term Kula develops meanings that join clan and lineage, the initiated community, the body, networks of divine powers, the cosmos, and the total field of manifestation. Kaula does not merely affirm that everything is sacred. It understands reality as an articulated family of powers whose elements must be related to one another and ultimately recognized in their unity with what transcends manifestation. Different Kaula systems express this architecture differently. They preserve distinct deities, mandalas, initiations, ritual sequences, yogic processes, classifications of practitioners, and accounts of liberation. Yet the recurring intuition is that body and cosmos, ritual and knowledge, enjoyment and liberation, purity and impurity, Shakti and Shiva, manifestation and transcendence cannot be understood as isolated opposites. They belong within one differentiated totality. In the Trika language, the movement through para, parapara, and apara can itself be read architecturally. Undivided reality does not simply disappear when distinction arises. It expresses itself through increasingly articulated subject-object worlds while remaining their ground. The many are not foreign material added to the one. They are what the freedom of the one is capable of appearing as. This is why the highest architectural intuition can be so persuasive. It does not merely say that different things should coexist politely, it sees differentiation itself as belonging to unity. The Kularnava Tantra offers one especially explicit expression of this wider Kaula tendency. It orders the paths of Veda, Vaisnava, Shaiva, Daksina, Vama, Siddhanta, and Kaula within an ascending hierarchy, and connects spiritual discipline with the Pashu, Vara, and Divya dispositions. Earlier paths are not treated simply as meaningless errors. They are assigned different levels, capacities, and operations, while Kaula is presented as their culmination and comprehensive fulfillment. The text makes this totalizing claim through powerful images. Other paths are said to enter Kuladharma as the footprints of animals disappear within the footprint of an elephant, while the philosophical systems are understood as limbs of the one divine reality. Such claims are not modern pluralism, they are hierarchical inclusivism. Other traditions are recognized and placed, but they are placed from within Kaula's own claim to culmination. Abhinavagupta represents the most sophisticated development of the same architectural impulse. In the Tantra Loka, different Shaiva and Kaula revelations, ritual systems, philosophical teachings, initiations, capacities, and means of realization are gathered into an immense differentiated structure. The architecture does not abolish the plurality of practices. It explains how they arise, whom they serve, what they accomplish, and how they are related to the highest recognition. This is what makes Kaula especially significant for the integrative architectural mind. It offers not merely one doctrine or practice, but a world capable of assigning a place to many doctrines, powers, dispositions, methods, and levels of experience. Within this larger structure, transgression is secondary rather than central. It is one practical consequence of the refusal to place any dimension of manifestation permanently outside the sacred. What has been rejected may need to be confronted and reintegrated, but only according to qualification, initiation, discipline, and the transformation of consciousness. Transgression receives its meaning from the architecture. The architecture does not exist to justify transgression. The distortion begins when one dramatic element is extracted from this whole. Taboo, sexuality, intoxicating ritual, or the rejection of conventional purity may then be treated as the essence of Kaula, while its metaphysics, gradation of capacity, ritual discipline, control of desire, lineage, and demand for genuine transformation disappear. Thus, Kaula reveals both the greatness and danger of the architectural mode. At its height, it constructs a sacred world, spacious enough to relate apparently opposed paths and powers without flattening them. At its collapse, one fragment, usually the most intoxicating and identity producing fragment, is detached from the whole and falsely proclaimed to be Kaula itself. Abhinavagupta as the primary exemplar. The strongest classical exemplar of the integrative architectural mind is Abhinavagupta. He gathered Trika, Krama, Kaula, Pratyabhijna, Spanda, ritual exegesis, aesthetics, mantra theory, contemplative recognition, and philosophical argument into one of the most extraordinary spiritual architectures in Indian religious history. His Tantra Loka is not merely a work of mystical inspiration. It organizes ritual, metaphysics, initiation, practice, and liberation into a vast whole. Abhinavagupta does not flatten the path. He distinguishes levels of practice, capacities of practitioners, kinds of initiation, metaphysical principles, ritual procedures, contemplative recognitions, and modes of realization. He does not simply declare all is Shiva and stop. He asks how the many unfold as expressions of the one. The shallow non dualist erases difference. The sectarian absolutist imprisons difference inside one form. The academic classifier describes difference from outside. Abhinavagupta integrates difference from within a practiced metaphysical world. His architecture is not neutral or pluralist in the modern sense. Other standpoints are often placed hierarchically within a Shaiva culmination. This must be admitted, but it is also part of his strength. He does not build from nowhere. He builds from a center. For this mode, he represents a rare integration of metaphysics, devotion, ritual, transgression, philosophical precision, contemplative recognition, aesthetics, and lineage. The transgressive component matters. His engagement with Kaula was not merely an academic classification of dangerous material from a safe distance. His texts can speak with striking openness about practices and doctrines that stood far outside respectable conventional religiosity. Architecture here has teeth because the architect has entered regions that a merely scholastic synthesis could leave abstract. This boldness makes the architecture more formidable. It does not make it infallible. Indeed, Abhinavagupta makes visible the mode's highest strength and its hardest question. An architecture can understand rival positions with extraordinary depth and still assign them places within a hierarchy whose summit has already been determined. The other is not caricatured, it is comprehended, sometimes magnificently, and then situated. The question is therefore not whether the architecture contains many paths. It plainly does. The deeper question is whether any path is permitted to disclose a form of ultimate maturity that would require the architecture itself to change. An architecture may leave many roads open while still determining in advance where every successful road must finally arrive. This is where admiration and criticism can coexist. The scale of the synthesis may be extraordinary, its very comprehensiveness may also become the place where the shadow begins. And yet the architecture is meant to terminate not in admiration of the architect, but in recognition, consciousness recognizing itself as the ground of all differentiated forms. At least in the logic of his work, the map is supposed to become transparent. Buddhist architectures, Zhiyi, Zongmi, and Kukai Buddhism generated one of the most complex internal pluralities of any religious tradition. Its scriptures and schools offered sharply differing accounts of mind, emptiness, Buddha nature, practice, revelation, stages, and liberation. The architectural task was therefore unavoidable. How could teachings that appeared contradictory all be attributed to the Buddha, and how could their differing operations be understood without reducing them to confusion? Zhiyi's Tiantai system offered one of the most powerful answers. It classified Buddhist teachings not merely by declaring some true and others false, but by asking in what context, for what capacity, and through what degree of recontextualization each teaching functioned as a liberating truth. Apparently opposed doctrines could therefore be assigned different places within an increasingly comprehensive vision of the one vehicle. Huayan developed a related architectural impulse at the level of metaphysics. In its vision of interpenetration, each phenomenon exists through all others, while difference is preserved within an all-encompassing Dharma realm. Here architecture becomes cosmic. Reality itself is understood as a totality whose parts contain and illuminate one another. Zongmi extended this mode further. He sought to reconcile doctrinal Buddhism with the competing forms of Chan, distinguishing their levels and matching contemplative claims with philosophical teachings. He also included Confucianism and Taoism within his classification, acknowledging their ethical insight while placing them within a Buddhist account of reality and awakening. Kukai created a Japanese esoteric version of the same architectural consciousness. He compared Confucianism, Taoism, and the Buddhist paths, then integrated metaphysics, ritual, mantra, body, language, cosmos, and realization within the living body and speech of Mahavairocana. Earlier teachings retained their relative function, but esoteric Buddhism was presented as their most complete embodied disclosure. These systems were not neutral pluralism, each built from a definite Buddhist center and placed other teachings hierarchically. Yet they show why Buddhist architecture became necessary. A vast plurality of apparently conflicting doctrines and practices had to be differentiated, related, and gathered into an intelligible path. Other traditional expressions. The mode appears in other forms across traditions. Thomas Aquinas built a monumental synthesis of Christian doctrine, Aristotelian philosophy, ethics, metaphysics, sacramental theology, and spiritual anthropology. Alexander Men offers a modern, orthodox Christian form of the architectural mind. His history of religion follows humanity's religious search through ancient cultures, philosophies, and pre-Christian traditions toward Christianity. He writes from a definite Christian center. Christ is not merely one religious figure among others, but the culmination toward which the history is ordered. Yet this conviction does not require him to dismiss the preceding traditions as empty error. He approaches them with learning and reverence, seeking the truths, intuitions, and spiritual longings they carried. His position is therefore neither neutral comparison nor shallow pluralism. It is Christian hierarchical integration. Other religions retain their dignity and historical meaning, but they are placed within a larger Christian account of revelation and fulfillment. Men could belong deeply to orthodoxy while allowing the spiritual history of humanity to remain vast, complex, and worthy of attention. This makes him a particularly humane expression of the architectural mode. The integrating center does not become a throne above other seekers. It becomes a way of receiving their search without surrendering one's own commitment. Ibn Arab unfolded a vast symbolic and metaphysical world of divine names, imagination, prophecy, sainthood, and the unity of being. Mulla Sadra synthesized peripatetic philosophy, illuminationism, Shi theology, and mystical insight. Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga places matter, life, mind, supermind, evolution, yoga, society, and divine manifestation within one developmental architecture. In each case, spiritual truth is treated not as one isolated practice or emotional relation, but as an ordered universe of levels, powers, and transformations. Joseph Campbell. The Earth-scale architecture of myth, Joseph Campbell offers a different modern expression of the mode. He was not primarily constructing a metaphysical hierarchy of spiritual realization. His architectural field was myth. In The Hero with a Thousand Faces, myths, separated by enormous distances of culture and history, are placed beside one another until recurrent movements become visible: departure, initiation, ordeal, transformation, return. The achievement is not merely comparative erudition. Campbell makes multiplicity form a pattern. This is one of the pure pleasures of architectural consciousness. A story that looked local suddenly participates in a structure larger than itself. Greek, Indian, Buddhist, biblical, folkloric, and other mythic materials become parts of an earth-scale landscape of human imagination. For many readers, this can make myth come alive. Stories once experienced as archaic or arbitrary begin to disclose psychological and existential movement. The architect does not merely explain the painting. He suddenly reveals a gallery in which paintings from distant worlds begin illuminating one another. Campbell also illustrates the danger. A recurrent pattern can become so compelling that difference begins to look like surface variation around the pattern the architect already expects to find. Cultural specificity, historical rupture, theological incompatibility, and forms of narrative that resist the monomyth can lose weight before the beauty of recurrence. The mature use of Campbell therefore preserves both discoveries. Patterns can genuinely cross cultures, and no pattern earns the right to consume the particular myths through which it became visible. The pattern illuminates the stories. The stories must remain capable of correcting the pattern. Ken Wilber, Modern Integral Architecture and Its Shadow. In the modern period, Ken Wilber is one of the clearest examples of the mode. His work organizes spirituality, psychology, developmental theory, science, culture, states, stages, types, and social analysis into a comprehensive framework. His real contribution was to distinguish dimensions often collapsed in spiritual discourse, mystical states from developmental maturity, psychological health from realization, cultural evolution from personal enlightenment, and individual awakening from social and embodied contexts. This helped explain why a person may have genuine mystical experiences and remain morally immature, or why a tradition may preserve deep contemplative methods while remaining socially limited. But Wilbur also illustrates the shadow. A system designed to include all perspectives can become difficult to challenge. Criticism may be interpreted as partial, lower level, insufficiently integral, or trapped inside one quadrant. The framework that honors complexity becomes a machine for placing every critic. The danger is not that he built a map. The map is powerful. The danger is the map's confidence that it can place everything. Jordan Peterson, Architectural Insight and Ethical Collapse. Jordan Peterson, especially in his earlier work and biblical lectures, also displayed considerable architectural power. He brought together clinical psychology, Jungian symbolism, mythology, biblical narrative, evolutionary biology, ideology, existential responsibility, and personal development. At his best, he showed how religious stories can encode psychological and existential knowledge, and how ideas become world-forming structures rather than abstract opinions. But his later public trajectory reveals how the mode can collapse. His categories, order and chaos, Western decay, resentment, responsibility, tradition, ideological possession, and civilizational conflict, began to dominate interpretation. Events were placed too quickly inside a pre-existing mythic political structure. The war in Ukraine exposed the failure sharply. When Russia's invasion is interpreted primarily through the drama of Western cultural conflict, architecture overrides ethical perception. The invaded nation becomes secondary to the interpreter's civilizational narrative. This is one of the gravest failures of the mode. The mind sees so much that it fails to see the obvious. Complexity should clarify the basic moral asymmetry, not blur it. One state invaded another. People are being killed. Sovereignty is being violated. The victim must not be made subordinate to the interpreter's theory. Peterson therefore shows how genuine synthesis can become self-enclosed. The current of discovery gives way to the defense of a world. Reality is no longer allowed to interrupt the architecture. Primary and secondary configurations. The mode must be distinguished from figures who possess architectural intelligence without being primarily architectural. Ramana Maharshi had an inclusive and integrating capacity. He accepted devotion, ritual, silence, self-inquiry, scripture, and different temperaments. But his dominant center was subtractive axial. Everything returned to the source, the I sense, and the dissolution of identification. He is therefore a subtractive master with secondary integrative breadth. Guruji Amritananda Natha Saraswati appears more visionary receptive and ritual sacramental, organized through Srividya, goddess experience, temple, mantra, and transmission. Yet he also displayed strong architectural capacity in creating Devapuram as a symbolic, ritual, social, and initiatory world. He may therefore be described as a visionary ritual architect rather than a purely architectural thinker. This distinction matters. Not everyone who includes many elements is primarily architectural. The question is, what governs the whole personality? Does architecture serve love, ritual, vision, silence, compassion, or purification? Or does integration itself become the central mode? The architect at the birth of a tradition. The architectural mode also appears with particular force when a new spiritual tradition is being formed. A charismatic founder may release a powerful current without constructing its complete doctrinal and institutional world. The task then passes to disciples, commentators, and systematizers who must gather inherited scriptures, philosophies, rituals, symbols, and practices into a coherent new configuration. They decide what is retained, what is rejected, what is reinterpreted, and how the founder's experience becomes a transmissible path. The six Gosvams offer a clear example. Caitanya left no systematic theology of his own. Rupa Gosvam organized the languages of bhakti, rasa, practice, and spiritual development. Sanatana Gosvam and Gopala Bhatta gathered ritual and normative materials from Puranic, Agamic, and Vaisnava sources. Jiva Gosvam constructed the epistemological, metaphysical, and theological architecture through which the emerging Gaudiya tradition could understand and defend itself. Similar figures appear elsewhere. Ramanuja joined Sanskrit Vedanta, Tamil devotional revelation, Pankaratra ritual, temple life, and community into the formative architecture of Sri Vaishnavism. Tsongkhapa reorganized inherited philosophy, monastic discipline, graduated practice, and Tantra into the structure from which the Gelug tradition emerged. Such figures reveal a distinctive function of the architectural mind. They do not merely interpret an already completed world. They build the world in which later practitioners will live. This construction is both necessary and dangerous. Without it, a revelation may remain a temporary current surrounding one extraordinary person. Through architecture, it acquires scripture, doctrine, ritual, lineage, education, and continuity, but the architecture may later conceal its own formation and present historical choices as eternal revelation. A tradition is often born through synthesis and later survives by forgetting that it was synthesized. The pattern across these cases, the same structure appears. At its highest, the integrative architectural mode gives relation without flattening, unity without simplification, plurality without chaos, and commitment without imprisonment. In Kaula, it organizes body, power, ritual, deity, taboo, lineage, and recognition into one differentiated sacred field. In Abhinavagupta, it becomes a Shaiva synthesis of metaphysics, practice, aesthetics, ritual, language, and liberation. In Zhi, Zongmi, Huayan, and Kukai, it responds to the vast plurality of Buddhist doctrines and practices by classifying, reconciling, and relating them within increasingly comprehensive accounts of awakening. In Aquinas, Ibn Arab, Mulasadra, Aurobindo, and Alexander Men, it becomes theological, metaphysical, or historical world building from within a definite religious center. In perennialism and traditionalism, it becomes a global metaphysical architecture capable of honoring several religions while risking the reduction of each to a pre-established account of what authentic tradition must be. In academia, it becomes comparative intelligence, capable of preserving difference and exposing simplistic claims, but always in danger of remaining outside the transformations it describes. In Campbell, it becomes Earth-scale comparative mythology, the discovery of recurring mythic structures capable of making distant traditions illuminate one another, while risking the reduction of irreducible stories to one compelling pattern. In Wilbur, it becomes modern integral theory. In Peterson, mythic, psychological, and civilizational synthesis. At the birth of traditions, it appears in those who gather revelation, inherited scripture, ritual, philosophy, and communal practice into a world that later generations can inhabit. The six Goswams, Ramanuja, and Tsongkhapa show how a spiritual current acquires doctrine, discipline, lineage, and continuity through architectural labor. But the danger follows the gift everywhere. Kaula can sanctify appetite once transgression is detached from qualification and discipline. Hierarchical synthesis can become closure. Perennialism can preserve religious plurality while assigning every tradition a meaning determined in advance. Scholasticism can become conceptual theology without sanctity. Aurobindo's vastness can become evolutionary intoxication. Academia can become understanding without transformation. The founder's architecture can conceal its own historical construction and later present synthesis as eternal revelation. Wilbur can become a map that places every critic. Peterson can become a civilizational architecture that loses ethical sobriety. The mode is rare, powerful, and unstable. Its greatness is that it can build a world large enough for many truths. Its danger is that it can become the world in which all truths are imprisoned. Return to proportion. The integrative architectural mind carries an indispensable truth. Spiritual reality is not flat. Human beings do not approach the sacred through one faculty only. We love, think, suffer, act, remember, imagine, purify, receive, rebel, submit, discern, and build. Traditions are not collections of beliefs, but worlds of language, practice, authority, rhythm, body, ethics, symbols, and characteristic transformations. The architectural mind sees this. It understands that the teaching cannot be judged only by its highest doctrine. One must ask what it does to the person who inhabits it. A practice cannot be separated from temperament, timing, preparation, and fruit. A mystical experience is not yet its interpretation. A tradition's power is not the same as its totality. A partial truth may become destructive precisely when it forgets that it is partial. This mode gives language to people who have moved through more than one spiritual world and cannot honestly return to simple belonging, but also refuse cynicism. It can say, "This was real, but not absolute. This transformed me, but also wounded me. This teacher revealed something true, but not everything in the teacher's form should be universalized. This path opened one faculty and neglected another. This doctrine is medicine in one place and poison in another. Such discernment is not betrayal, it is one form of gratitude. A path is honored more truthfully when it is not forced to carry more than it can bear. Yet the architectural mode must remain under judgment. Its own truth is partial. The one who sees many modes is not beyond mode. The one who understands many paths has not therefore walked them. The one who builds a vast map has not therefore reached the summit. This becomes especially important when architecture begins from a metaphysics of unity. If the source is genuinely free enough to become many, then its freedom should make the architect more humble, not less. A single painter capable of radically different styles cannot be known merely by reducing every painting to one visible formula. If the one is truly free to become many, the many may exceed the architect's ability to predict what unity must look like within them. This does not destroy the intuition of unity, it protects it from becoming possession. The deepest unity may be precisely what allows difference to remain real without becoming ultimate separation. Architecture can imitate wisdom more convincingly than almost any other distortion. It can sound spacious while dominating, humble while occupying the highest seat, reverent while never bowing, compassionate while never serving, and ethical while escaping ordinary responsibility. Therefore, the architectural mind must remain porous. It must allow devotion to soften it, analysis to challenge it, compassion to interrupt it, discipline to embody it, transgression to expose its protected identity, silence to cut through the one who understands, and ordinary life to test whether the construction has touched the person at all. The mature form is not the sovereign interpreter, it is the servant of right relation. Its task is not to stand above all traditions, but to help each truth find its proper place without losing its dignity. It does not abolish commitment, it makes commitment more conscious. It does not destroy reverence, it protects reverence from becoming captivity. It does not replace practice, it shows why practice must be embodied and tested. In its immature form, this mode asks, how can I contain everything? In its mature form, it asks, how can everything be related without being possessed? That difference is decisive. The mountain remains greater than every map, but without maps, climbers may confuse one route for all routes, wander into dangers they do not understand, or mistake a partial ascent for the summit. The map is needed. The map is not enough. The architecture is needed. The architecture is not the absolute. At its best, the integrative architectural mind builds structures of understanding whose doors remain open, to correction, to suffering, to silence, and to the truth no system can finally contain. The mature aim is therefore not a complete architecture in which every possible reality has already received its final location. It is an open architecture, coherent enough to orient, differentiated enough to protect real distinctions, and porous enough to encounter something for which no category is yet adequate. A living map must contain one strange possibility. The terrain may still redraw the map. This is the final test of the mode, not whether it can explain every objection, but whether reality can still force a new distinction, break an old hierarchy, reveal an unsuspected maturity, or leave something standing outside the structure long enough to transform the one who built it. The architect may continue to seek the hand behind the paintings. They must not assume they already know every style that hand is capable of creating. When it remembers this, architecture becomes an ally of wisdom. When it forgets this, it becomes a throne.